All right, college football does not look like it has ever before. The Big Ten doesn't look like it has ever before. Are Michigan fans, are Big Ten fans in general, are they excited about adding Oregon, Washington, USC, UCLA, and maybe other teams here in the future?
I don't think so. I think that we feel like college football got ruined and we did it. Is how I feel about it. You know, it's there's no question whether Michigan's brass was involved because you can see them at the meetings, right? You can see our athletic director was personally involved in some of these decisions, and you can see how Michigan stands to benefit because the idea is all about let's capture the biggest amount of TV money and set ourselves up because they know they're going to eventually have to pay the players, whether they get forced to or they figure out a way to do it. But they're going to have to pay the players out of their TV money, which has always been the fight, right? How do the players get to share in that? So as college football transitions to this new thing, the people who were making the money in the old way are trying to set themselves up to not make less money when they don't deserve to be making any money. And that's kind of where we're at in college football as far as I see it. I think it's terrible. I think that the Pac-10 deserves to live. And like Washington State fans care about their team just as much as anyone cares about their team and like to all of a sudden you guys, even though you're a viable program and people like to go to you and you don't fit into this model where Rutgers is important because they got in when cable mattered and Northwestern matters because they got in back when living in Chicago mattered. And like that's where we're at right now, right? Like if you're going to go and try to make Uber conferences or make a 60 or 70 team Division 1 right now, you would not necessarily choose the teams that made it into the Big 10 and the SEC. It's just let's do what we can get away with and care about the sport later. And I think that it's really hard as a fan to see this happening, to see your own program being part of that happening and say and no one's saying what's best for the sport and what's best for the most people who care about this sport. And I think it's a tragedy.
Yeah, I am. Personally, I'm a big fan of a lot of Olympic sports too. I took my daughter to the Women's College World Series last year. I'm taking my daughter to a beach volleyball competition in this weekend, and I wonder about those sports. And I know that's not what moves the needle. I know that's not why necessarily anybody's tuned into this, but I do wonder about what happens with those sports going forward
I
as
mean,
well.
they haven't cared. I mean, softball and baseball are going to do fine because now they have access to California, and that's been a Michigan has Michigan softball was huge even when I was there, so I've been a softball fan for years. And baseball, historically, you go back to the early 1900s, Michigan was a baseball superpower, and now we're not. Right now, we get a great coach, and he gets poached because we're a mid-major, and that's just the reality. And that happens because they moved the season way into springtime, and
Old, yeah.
Big Ten, yeah, and they keep on moving it further and further into winter because the teams that works for them, and they're going to push for that. Same thing's happening in hockey with small teams who are just kind of pushing the sport into the Northeast, and it feels like the same things just happen. Like no one's really looking out for what's best for the sport. No one's saying what's best for college athletes. No one's saying what's best for the fans. They're saying what works best for me with the power that I have, what can I get away with right now? And it's very like medieval in the way that everyone's thinking and are forced to think because there is no NCAA to say stop. This is what we all agreed to. We all said we're going to create one organization that's going to look out for what's best for sports, and they don't do that. Now, baseball and softball, they're going to be okay because now they have access to UCLA and USC, and they can have their spring tournament there. And now they have a home, even though if it's not their home, they have a place to go and play Big Ten baseball or Big Ten softball. Um, it's affecting each of those sports differently, but obviously, no one's looking at what's going to happen when Oregon has to play at Rutgers, right? No one cares. It's just what can we create? How much TV revenue can we create by creating these big games that are going to therefore force Fox and whatnot to spend more money to broadcast these games? And then Fox has to recoup that money by having more ads in these games. And it's just, how much are you going to yank from everyone and just shitify everything until people say, I'm sick of this and I'm going to get into my local soccer team or something.
Yeah. It doesn't seem like it's anywhere close to over either. We rumors every single day about who may be joining the Big Ten next. As much as we may hate it, or you may not necessarily agree with it, if you had to rank
Yeah.
the 5 teams that get talked about the most from the ACC, how are you ranking your personal ones on FSU, Clemson, North Carolina, Virginia, and Miami coming to the Big Ten?
Well, first off, Notre Dame fans are going to thank you for not calling them an ACC team.
I got them coming.
God, come on. I mean, but it's like, I mean, as soon as the lawyers figure it out, Notre Dame's like, yeah, we should have done this in the 1800s, and
Yeah.
we should have let them in the 1800s, but they were Catholic, and there was a thing about that back then, so whatever. But like that was always the fact that like not Michigan, the Big Ten always had this thing with Nebraska and Notre Dame where like, should we those guys come in? And it felt right when Nebraska came in. It felt right when they came in. As far as adding more schools at this point, I don't even see it as like, a conference. I don't feel like these are like, our colleagues, and these are not like like Notre Dame would be a colleague. I know they're fans. We interact with each other. We go to each other's games. We play hockey against each other, right? Nebraska, I know they're fans too. Nebraska graduates come and live in Midwest cities, and we all intermingle in Chicago, and they come to Detroit, and you pass Huskers all the time. That made some sense. Stop making sense with Maryland and Rutgers, and now it just makes no sense. I don't have anything to do with Oregon and USC fans. And so as far as like adding teams to the conference, it's all about money. So it's just like, okay, give me the spreadsheet and tell me which one makes the most money, right? Like I would get excited to play some of these teams. Like we've had good games against Miami. We had some great games when I was a kid against FSU. But those are other parts of the country, and I don't feel like there's any conference collegiality with those schools. I don't feel like we're gonna now we're gonna open up our library and have access to more files because we're in a conference with these schools. Like even that's not even happening with the ones that we're adding. Like Washington, I think is the only one that's joining the consortium of Big Ten academic schools that shares their libraries and whatnot. Like the University of California is not doing that. So the only thing that matters is in sports, and the thing about sports is when the league's this big, I'm not even going to play you guys anyway, right? Like Michigan doesn't see UCLA. It's the first time since 1910 that a school has joined the Big Ten and not played Michigan that year, and that's only because Michigan wasn't in the Big Ten. In 1910, they'd left, so when they added Ohio State had to cancel their game with Michigan, not play Michigan, because they were joining a conference that didn't have Michigan in it. So that's how weird this is. We've gone to a spot where like I can't even answer that question of all those teams, right? Who do you want? Clemson, FSU, Miami? Like they all feel like foreigners, right?
Yeah.
It's like who do you want to join the Midwest next? Italy or France? I guess the French have likes food, but the Italians have good wine too. Like I don't know.
I think that no, I think you're spot on. I think especially Florida State and Clemson. Miami's never really felt like they kind of always felt like they're off on their own island, but Florida State and Clemson feel like SEC programs to me. They are. The ACC is just the SEC junior, and maybe like twice removed. But it feels weird. Florida State. I mean, there'd be some fun games. Florida State and Penn State had some good games when Paterno and Bowden were going at it, and Florida State is you'll enjoy this 3-0 against Ohio State all time. I'm sure that would be fun to add to. Michigan, there's been some fun stuff. Nebraska, there was obviously the championship game and there that rivalry in the 90s. But yeah, I mean, it doesn't feel natural at all. Miami actually would feel a little more. I don't know, as they're farther away geographically, they'd feel a little more natural than even Florida State, who obviously the city of Miami versus Tallahassee, it feels a little culturally different, but still regionally it doesn't. I mean, it doesn't make sense a lot, but again,
I never
makes
understood
sense.
why
Neither did Southern Cal,
on that in the first place. Actually, no, I do understand because FSU was so. When I was becoming an uber college football fan, like FSU just had it made. Right? They sat there in the ACC. They did not have Miami and Virginia Tech and Boston College yet. Like they had that thing to themselves.
Yeah.
And it was like, okay, people didn't mind watching them just crush their opponents every year. And Oklahoma used to do that to the Big South the Big Eight, right? And Texas used to do that in in the Southwest. This was how things were. The only weird ones were like Michigan, Ohio State. We were fighting over who gets to win the Big Ten every year. But most of these conferences had like one mega power, or you would have a couple independents who would go and do their own thing. But like I didn't mind that Florida State wasn't playing anybody that interesting. Peter Warwick was going to fly around Wake. That was fun to watch. That was how I interacted with FSU, and then they got to the championship, and you'd see, right, like, okay, go stop Michael Vick, good, you beat him, you win. But that's it. And there wasn't a whole lot of I don't know, trying to force this conference collegiality and stuff into it, and like trying to define like what's a Big Ten school. Like I don't think there's anything that connects all the Big Ten schools today, and that's same thing's true with the SEC. There's no fabric that connects all those programs together except for they are contractually involved in a television deal.
Correct.
Right? That's what it is. Yeah. So like it's like NFC versus AFC. Can you remember which team is which? Yes, because you're an NFL fan. You watch enough football, you know who's competing in what league. But we're too young to even remember when those were separate leagues now. And I think anyone except for the older baby boomers and some people who still alive before then remember a time when those were different leagues and did not feel comfortable playing each other. Like they were different things. That's AFC, NFC is what we're talking about now. And like if you join the Big Ten or you join the SEC, if you're FSU or you're Miami or whatever, it doesn't matter. It's more likely that they're going to join someone less like themselves, because then you can expand that TV contract into a larger audience, right? Like they already have Florida for the SEC, so the Big Ten's going to be more interested. That's what I think is going on.
Yeah. I'll wrap up with this. We mentioned Notre Dame, but do Michigan fans want Notre Dame in the Big Ten, or do they want to kind of keep them at arm's length and keep them out, like just because of the rivalry, or thoughts there?
No, we've been walking down the aisle with them so long. It's like, what's going on, man? Like, like you ever have like one of those recruiting, like those recruits where like, okay, we have all the crystal balls for this guy, and it's like just goes on for year after year, and you're like, okay, commit already. What's going on? And then like you finally lose them. That's kind of what it feels like with Notre Dame. It's just The history is so deep there, and we played each other so many times and so many different things. And when Jim Harbaugh took the Michigan job, he came with like a list. It was like a handwritten list of like things that need to happen. And one of them is like, fix the yellow. It's too highlighter. I can't deal with it. And another one was, we have to play Notre Dame. And Notre Dame's had this jerk in charge of it, Jack Swarbrick, for years. So it's really hard to play ball with him, because anytime you say, hey, we want to do something, he's like, okay, how can I screw you? And that's how deep it goes. We know who their AD is. They know who our AD is. We work with them. We go to, our kids go to schools with them. And I don't know how it is in every other state, but like, I'm sure there's like where your favorite college team to school day in elementary school, and then they take a vote and they report how many are of what, right? And so our schools will probably be like 50% Michigan and 35% Michigan State, and then like number 3 is always Notre Dame. They're right there, and they're right on the border of Michigan, and they're right on the way to Chicago. So it's like that whole area, that they're the connective tissue between us and Chicago. And like the fact that they haven't been in the conference for many, many years because we used to not like Catholics, and that's the reason, or like they used to be cheaters, and that's the reason. Like that's just so it's like no one's alive. Literally nobody is alive. The last time Notre Dame was like the biggest cheaters in the country. I think they might be doing it now. But I think that like since they were like the big bad guys, that like the Big Ten was like, no, we can't have them in here. No one's alive since then. And that's still the thing. And that's still why they're mad at each other. So no one even remembers why this thing started, unless you're like an historian like me. And the fact that they're not in the Big Ten and that we've expanded this whole thing, like they're part of Big Ten hockey now. So maybe there's some wiggle room. Maybe there's some way to do that. But like, it's stupid that they don't play Michigan and Purdue and Michigan State every year, because those are rivals.
Yeah. Now they got USC there as well. So add another one.
Yeah.
Add another one to it.
Well, they joined you. They started fighting USC. This is how deep this goes. They started fighting USC and Stanford. That started because Notre Dame could not get a game with Michigan. They're like Fielding Yost was in charge of Michigan at this point. He was the athletic director at the time, and he was like, "I'm not playing them anymore because they voted against me when I said that like the referee was wrong in this track meet." Like that's literally what that's about. And so then Notre Dame's like, "Fine, we're just gonna go tour the country and play everybody." And they play Army, and they play Navy, and they play USC, and they play Stanford, and their players got to go travel to all these places. They got to go to New York, and they got to go to LA, and like that was cool, and people wanted to go play for Notre Dame, and that's part of their story. So that's how deep this goes. They're enemies with USC because we were like not willing to go on a date with them in 1920 something.
The history of it all is fantastic. Where can people
Yeah.
follow you, find more of your work, read some of that history as well?
You can go on MGO blog to follow me for all my football content and all of our basketball content and some more hockey content than you want, and less softball content than I want to write because of when the season takes place. And there's stuff on Twitter at @Misapagon. And for history stuff, I'm sorry, you're going to have to go to University of Michigan and take the course.
Good stuff. I appreciate you for joining us. Thank you for hanging out, man. Good stuff.